This story is real. Every frame, every echo, every unanswered question still hangs over a Texas town to this day. It begins before sunrise, inside a quiet church meant for peace. A place where a mother of 3 showed up to help others live healthier, stronger lives. But someone else walked in that morning too, dressed in tactical gear, moving slowly, deliberately, like they were waiting for her. What happened next still haunts investigators, and the footage they left behind has become one of the most chilling mysteries in modern true crime. This is the case of Missy Bevers. The truth doesn't hide forever. From whispers to breaking news, this is Now You Know News, your front row seat to the world's darkest stories. When officers reached Creekside Church that morning, nothing made sense at first. Missy's truck was parked neatly outside. The lights inside the building were still off, and the only real sign of trouble was a thin trail of shattered glass glinting near the side entrance. It looked less like a break-in and more like someone wanted it to look like a break-in. Inside, the air felt heavy, untouched. No overturned chairs, no signs of panic, just the quiet echo of a place meant for prayer, now holding something far darker. Then detectives found her, and in that moment, every officer in the building knew this wasn't random. The attack was fast, brutal, and whoever did it moved through the church like they had rehearsed it. Back at the station, investigators crowded around the security monitor. The footage showed a lone figure stepping through the door in full tactical gear, helmet, vest, gloves, even knee pads. They didn't rush, they didn't hesitate. They moved with slow, deliberate confidence, like someone who knew the layout and knew exactly when Missy would be alone. One detective whispered, "This wasn't a burglary. This was an ambush." The more investigators studied the surveillance footage, the stranger it became. The suspect didn't act like a typical intruder. They weren't rushing, they weren't searching for anything to steal. Not aimlessly, but almost comfortably. Stepping into offices, testing doors, swinging a small tool in their hand as if they were rehearsing for something. When the figure finally moved toward the main hallway, the same hallway Missy would walk down minutes later, detectives noticed something else. The suspect's height and build shifted depending on the camera angle. Sometimes broad-shouldered, sometimes narrow, sometimes taller, sometimes shorter. It left investigators asking a question they hated. Were they looking at a man or a woman? Meanwhile, Missy's husband Brandon arrived to speak with police. His face looked drained, shaken, but as he walked in, detectives couldn't help noticing the coincidence. Brandon had been away on a fishing trip that morning, hours from the crime scene. It was a solid alibi. Uncomfortable timing, but solid. Still, in a case like this, everyone close to the victim had to be examined. Then investigators got their hands on a new angle of footage, a view from inside a storage room. And what they saw made the entire room go silent. For a split second, under the tactical gear, the suspect's gait, that unique rhythm of how a person walks, matched someone detectives knew. Not family, not a friend, someone from Missy's fitness world, someone who'd been acting strangely ever since the news broke. But the footage wasn't clear enough to confirm anything. It was only a clue, and in a case already drowning in confusion, clues could be dangerous. The public had been watching the case unfold for days, and the mystery only made things worse. The strange walk, the fake police gear, the timing of Missy's arrival, none of it made sense. Then the tips started rolling in, not from strangers, but from people who actually knew Missy. Some said the walk in the footage looked familiar. Not the height, not the build, the gait, that subtle sway a person doesn't even realize they have. One name kept showing up, someone who had trained with Missy. Someone who had friction with her. Someone whose behavior had shifted dramatically right after the murder. Police couldn't ignore it, but they also couldn't act on it, not without something solid. At the same time, investigators were deep diving into the footage frame by frame. And that's when a new theory started to form. What if the suspect wasn't trying to hide their identity with gear, but with movement? Changing stride length, shifting posture, keeping the body loose so the cameras couldn't lock onto anything consistent. Was this person inexperienced or trained? Someone who understood police behavior? Employee? Volunteer? Someone familiar with law enforcement gear? Detectives didn't say it out loud, but they all felt the same thing. This wasn't random. This wasn't chance. This was targeted. Meanwhile, Missy's inner circle was being interviewed again, this time more carefully. Friends, campers, fellow instructors, people who had seen her last posts, her last messages, her last interactions. One story stood out. Someone had been acting uneasy around Missy, avoiding eye contact, sending conflicting messages, showing up unexpectedly, and sometimes uninvited. No threats, no major fights, but enough unease that Missy had mentioned it to someone close. The more investigators listened, the more they realized something chilling. The killer probably wasn't a stranger who broke into a church for no reason. The killer knew Missy. The killer had a reason. And somewhere in her circle, someone was hiding it. Rumors were spreading fast. Online sleuths debated every frame of the footage. Locals whispered theories in grocery store aisles. But inside the investigation, something far more real was happening. Detectives were zeroing in on a name, and now they had a reason to pull that thread harder. The person in question had submitted tips, but never the same story twice. One version was nervous. Another was overly confident. Another was strangely defensive. Why would someone keep inserting themselves like that? Then came the first real break. A witness stepped forward, quietly, almost afraid. They mentioned a message Missy had received not long before her death. A message that felt off, almost like a warning disguised as small talk. Police obtained it, read it, and realized something chilling. The sender was the same person whose name had been popping up in tips. This wasn't proof. Not enough for an arrest, but enough to push harder. Investigators dug deeper. Phone records, social media timestamps, activity logs. And that's when they uncovered something no one expected. On the night before Missy was killed, the suspect's phone jumped locations. Not by miles, but by minutes. Enough to suggest movement. Enough to raise eyebrows. There was more. A friend told detectives the suspect had been unusually emotional after the murder. Not grieving, but panicked. Calling people late at night. Deleting posts. Changing stories. Why panic, unless there was something to hide? Investigators called the person in for another interview. Not as a witness this time, but as someone of interest. The suspect walked in cool, composed, but their hands told a different story. Shaking, fidgeting, clenching, and unclenching. And when detectives mentioned the surveillance footage, the suspect's face changed, just for a second. A flicker, a flash, fear. But without clear proof, the interview ended. No confession, no slip-up, just tension thick enough to cut. Still, police felt it in their bones. They were getting close. Very close. Days passed, then weeks. The investigation kept grinding forward, but everyone felt the same frustration. They were close, but not close enough. And then came the moment that changed the entire direction of the case. It started with one detective, the kind who didn't like loose ends. He went back to the surveillance video for the 100th time. But this time, he slowed it down even more. Frame by frame, pixel by pixel. And he noticed something no one else had. Not the walk, not the stride, not the gear. A reflection, a tiny glint, bouncing off a metal door frame as the suspect passed. So small you'd miss it unless you were looking for it. The reflection wasn't of the suspect. It was of something they were carrying. A tool. A specific type, used by a specific group of people. Not burglars. Not vandals. People trained to breach doors quietly. Why would a random killer have that? When investigators pulled equipment logs from local law enforcement suppliers, one detail hit like a punch. Only a handful of people in the entire county owned something like that. And one of those names was the same person who'd been hovering around the case since day one. But the break didn't stop there. That same day, a new witness came in, someone who'd been scared to talk before. They said they'd seen a vehicle parked near the church around the time of the murder. A vehicle that looked exactly like the suspect's. Not a perfect match, but close enough to make detectives' skin crawl. The more the pieces came together, the harder it became to ignore. The suspects' shifting stories, their emotional spiral, their connection to Missy's fitness world, the behavior after her death, the tool, the vehicle, every puzzle piece pointed in their direction. And for the first time since Missy's murder, Detectives felt something they hadn't felt before. Certainty. There was only one problem. Certainty wasn't evidence. Not yet. Police couldn't arrest them, couldn't confront them, couldn't even hint they were close. One wrong move, and the suspect could disappear forever. The investigation had reached a new level, and the next mistake couldn't be theirs. By now, investigators knew one thing for certain. The case had reached a point of no return. They couldn't rush it. They couldn't spook the suspect. And they couldn't afford to be wrong. Instead of making an arrest, police did something far more dangerous. They watched. Phone records were pulled. Financials quietly reviewed. Social media activity archived and time-stamped. Patterns began to emerge. Late-night calls that stopped abruptly after the murder. Messages deleted within minutes. Search histories that suggested panic, not grief, from the suspect's behavior. They started slipping. Friends noticed mood swings, calm one moment, volatile the next. They talked too much, then clammed up completely. They asked strange questions about the investigation. Questions only someone with something to hide would ask. Detectives brought the suspect in, not as an arrest, not as an accusation. Just a conversation. The suspect smiled, cracked jokes, acted cooperative, but the body language told a different story. Hands clenched, foot tapping, eyes constantly scanning the room. Investigators didn't push. They let the suspect talk, and talk, and talk, because every word was being recorded, every contradiction logged, every pause analyzed. By the end of the interview, the suspect thought they'd won. They walked out free. But behind closed doors, detectives replayed the footage again and again. And that's when they caught it. One sentence, one tiny detail, something the suspect shouldn't have known, because it had never been released to the public. The room went silent. That was the crack in the wall. Not enough to charge, not enough to arrest, but enough to prove one thing. The suspect had been there. The investigation was no longer about if they could prove it. It was about when, and how long the suspect could keep pretending, before the pressure finally crushed them. Investigators didn't rush in after the interview. They didn't celebrate. They waited. Because in cases like this, the truth rarely explodes. It leaks. Days after the interview, the suspect made a mistake. A small one. The kind only someone under extreme pressure would make. They tried to explain away the detail they'd accidentally revealed, changing their story just enough to sound reasonable, but not enough to sound truthful. That was all investigators needed to reopen doors they'd quietly closed. Search warrants followed. Digital devices were seized. Old messages, once deleted, were recovered. And then came the moment every investigator waits for. A message, sent before the murder. Worded carefully, but not carefully enough. It referenced a time, a place, and a detail about the church layout that only someone familiar with the building would know. The case shifted instantly. What had once been theory became trajectory. What had once been suspicion became strategy. Detectives brought the suspect back in. This time, the tone was different. The questions were sharper. The pauses longer. The evidence placed gently on the table, one piece at a time. The suspect tried to stay calm. Tried to control the room. But the room was no longer theirs. Hands shook. Breathing changed. The confident mask slipped. Just enough. Then came the final mistake. A denial, delivered too quickly, too rehearsed, and directly contradicting the recovered message. The detective didn't raise their voice. Didn't accuse. They just slid the evidence forward. And waited. That was it. The moment the suspect realized the game was over. Not because they were arrested, but because they were exposed. Outside the room, detectives already knew. They had their case. It was no longer a question of who, only how long it would take before the truth was spoken out loud. The arrest didn't come with flashing lights or dramatic chases. It came quietly. Early in the morning, officers knocked on the suspect's door. No press, no warning, just handcuffs, and the weight of everything that had been building for weeks. As the suspect was taken into custody, investigators finally said the words they'd been holding back. Murder. Not an accident. Not a breaking gone wrong. A targeted killing. News spread fast. Within hours, Missy's name filled headlines again. This time alongside words the community had been waiting for. Arrest made. For Missy's family, the relief was complicated. There was gratitude, but also grief that no arrest could erase. They spoke about her strength, her laughter, her passion for helping others feel confident and alive. In court, prosecutors laid out the case piece by piece. The footage, the behavior, the evidence that slowly closed in. Defense attorneys pushed back, arguing doubt, coincidence, misinterpretation. But the story investigators had built was no longer fragile. It was solid. As the suspect stood before the judge, one truth settled over everyone watching. This wasn't about a disguise anymore, or a strange walk, or unanswered questions. It was about accountability. Outside the courthouse, people gathered again, not in confusion this time, but in quiet resolve. Justice hadn't healed the wound, but it had finally given it a name. Missy Bevers was remembered not for how she died, but for how she lived, and the mystery that once haunted this case was finally giving way to truth.